Poštovani gledaoci, pozdravljam vas iz Vašingtona. Naš večerašnji gost jedan je od onih koje pamtite bez napora. Joseph Biden, 56-godišnji demokrata iz države Delaware, jedan je od najprominentnijih članova Američkog senata, smještenog u desnom krilu zgrade Američkog kongresa. Htjela bih kazati da je Senat nadležan za vanjsku politiku, jer u tom kontekstu za Bosnu i Hercegovinu ovo tijelo je bilo iznimno važno tokom rata u našoj zemlji. U tom kontekstu spoljno-politički komitet, gdje je senator Biden jedan od najprominentnijih članova, bio je zaslužan za kreiranje konačnih poteza u ratu u Bosni, kao i u nedavno okončanom ratu na Kosovu. U oba slučaja senator Biden bio je od onih koji je stalno pitao zašto se ne poduzimaju konkretnije akcije, zašto se ne uradi nešto hitno po pitanju Bosne u vrijeme najteže krize, recimo Srebreničke. Stalno i neumoljivo je prozivao administraciju, dakle sopstvenog predsjednika, zašto se ne poduzimaju promptnije akcije. U vašingtonskim intelektualnim i političkim krugovima senator Biden ostaće zapamćen po iznimno jakim izjavama oko Bosne i Hercegovine, kazali bi Amerikanci veoma passionate, dakle bez imalo rezerve tražio je da se sve poduzme za očuvanje jedinstvene i multietničke države. U oba slučaja, i po pitanju Bosne i po pitanju Kosova, senator Biden ostaće zapamćen po strastvenom zalaganju da administracija nešto poduzme hitno i bez rezerve. Predsjednik Clinton smatra se zaslužnim za konačne poteze. Senator Biden prijatelj je sa predsjednikom Clintonom, ali se ne libi reći da on nije njegov šef. Moj šef su moji glasači u Delivereu. Moji birači, kaže senator Biden. Stoga, ako bih htjela kazati riječ više, dozvolite da kažem da postoje ljudi koji su dobri i postoje ljudi koji su profesionalci. Senator Biden, rekla bih, jedan je od onih rijetkih kod koji su ove dvije osobine pomirene u savršenstvu. U ekskluzivnom intervju za televiziju Bosne i Hercegovine senator Biden govori o tome šta je trebalo ili šta nije učinjeno po pitanju rata, o Miloševiću, Silajđiću, Izetbegoviću, o Clintonu i Clintonovoj doktrini, uopće o 21. stoljeću. Slijedi razgovor sa čovjekom koji vjeruje u opstanak Bosne i Hercegovine i poručuje doviđenja u Sarajevu na Olimpijadi 2010. Senator Biden, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
When I say Bosnia and Herzegovina, what is the first thought that crosses your mind?
Magnificent, beautiful country and such talented people and such a pity how the people in the country have been scarred so badly.
Senator Biden, you have been among the strongest supporters of Bosnia. Many know your record. But can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I'm often asked why.
I know you're coming from Delaware. The motto of your state is liberty and independence. Is it fair to say that passion for justice is in your blood?
Well, it's inherited from my parents. My parents have raised us in a way that I think the single most defining feature of my notions of political existence is that the thing I hate the most is abuse of power. And the ultimate abuse of power is virulent nationalism that takes the form of genocide. I mean, that's the ultimate abuse of power. For example, I happen to be a Catholic, a Roman Catholic. The first time I ever took my children, my sons, to Europe, and my daughter years later, I took them to Dachau. First time. My friends thought, now, wait, you get off the plane, you usually go to Paris, or you go to London, or you go to wherever. I went to Munich and got in a car and drove them before we went to the hotel to Dachau, because I wanted them to understand that the inhumanity that man has visited upon other men is endemic in our species, and it cannot be tolerated. And the only time it ever takes root is when good people remain silent. When they remain silent. And what was happening with Milosevic beginning in 1989 was clear to me that there was an absolute clear repetition of the pattern of hatred and virulence that was being used as a political tool. And that's why I got so, I guess, passionately involved in Bosnia. But I got to meet people, Croats, Serbs, Bosniaks, who I came to love. I mean, they were good people, but finding what it seemed to me was that the larger events in their lives were causing them to have to make decisions that were counterintuitive, that they wouldn't otherwise make, but they had no choice.
Senator Biden, is it fair to say that the newest generation of representatives is more into domestic issues? Either way, what do you believe is the future of American foreign policy?
Well, you're very astute. I think the single biggest debate that remains unresolved in the United States of America is whether or not we're going to be internationalist or isolationist. And lest people rush too quickly to judge those who think in terms of isolation, it is a natural human instinct. I mean, when I go around the world and I go throughout Europe, people will say, well, we know so much more about your country than you know about ours. And I say, yes, of course you do. We're 260 million people, you're 10 million or 8 million or 5 million. And what happens to you does not directly affect us, but what happens to us affects you. So don't be so self-righteous about our country. It is almost counterintuitive for people to reach out and try to solve other people's problems. But we've learned over the last century, a miserable century when you think about it, the last 100 years in Europe. I mean, miserable, the millions and millions and millions of people killed in the name of self-righteousness. Because I'm going to say something that's going to get me in trouble. There's some fine, wonderful leaders in Europe. But I don't think Europe has reached the point of political maturation where they are able to solve their problems without a bit of an outside catalyst, the United States. We don't solve the problems for Europe, but we are a European power. Had, for example, we disengaged completely in Bosnia, said that's a European problem as President Bush said it was, this would never be resolved.
The thing, sir, you said you hate to see abuse of power. Is it fair to say that Americans sometimes are tending to abuse the power, being the only one remaining?
Yes, they are, but there are two, if I can make an analogy, there are two ways in which power is abused. I used to be taught by the nuns who would say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But it matters whether you start out with good intentions or bad intentions. I challenge anyone in Europe or the Balkans to name me any country that's willing to put their young women and young men on the line, their blood on the line, for no territorial gain, no economic gain, no political gain. None. What the hell what politically, economically, or in terms of territory do we gain in the Balkans? We, in fact, for example, in the war in Kosovo, we did say, all right, this is it. We're going to bomb this site. Now let's get this straight. The reason we did is no one would make a decision. There was chaos. Chirac was sitting back and saying, well, this target we can't do. And someone saying, well, this target we can't do. And there was paralysis. So in a sense, we exercised our power as the largest, most powerful nation in the world militarily. But it didn't start off that way. Had we sat down and said, all right, we have a game plan, that wouldn't have occurred. And so I don't mean America makes mistakes, but I would say most of the mistakes we make are mistakes of the heart. They are not mistakes based upon our avarice, our greed, our desire to dominate.
Senator Biden, you were among the youngest senators in American history and the most influential, not only among Democrats when it comes to foreign policy. What conclusion should foreign countries draw about the relationship between Congress and administration, especially with regard to the Balkans? Was the Congress in real opposition, let us say, on sending ground troops, or was there animosity towards Clinton, even though they say it wasn't personal?
There was both. The truth of the matter is there were both. One of the disturbing things that has occurred is that our politics in America have become more partisan. Now, admittedly, we don't settle our differences with a gun, but we have begun to seek political advantage relative to one another in a way that's counterproductive. One of the things that has happened is the Republican Party, which has historically been this century a party of isolation, and the Democratic Party has been historically the party of engagement, united on one common theme, and that was opposition to communism. And that was viewed as the great threat. It was a unifying element in American foreign policy. And so we're going through a period of transition. On top of that period of transition came this virulent personal dislike on the part of many Republicans for President Clinton. It is palpable, it is deep. And so one of the reasons why I believed that at the end of the day, if we needed to send ground troops to Kosovo, we would have had the votes to do that, is because I still believe if that was absolutely required, the Congress would have supported the president. But since the air war was working, since the outcome looked like it may be what it was, it gave the opposition of the luxury of being just opposition for opposition's sake. Now that's not to say, and I'll end with this, it's not to say that many Republicans do not fundamentally disagree with our involvement in the Balkans. For example, Senator Nichols, the #2 Republican in the Senate, he truly believed that Mr. Milosevic has the right to do in his country whatever he wishes to do in his country. And Kosovo is in his country, and if it's genocide, so be it.
Let me ask you some questions about President Clinton and afterwards about Bosnia, which is most important for me. It seems you're close to the president, and Senator, do you believe that his gamble against military and conservative thinking, both in Bosnia and in Kosovo, will result in long-term success?
I do. Let me put it another way. Had he not done this, I think it would have been guaranteed failure. Let's put something in focus. You know better than I that Bosnia has a long way to go, that Dayton is not being fully implemented. But you also know when you call home, you're not as likely to be worried that your mother, your father, your aunt, your uncle has recently been shot. You're not worried that as they walk down after work and sit at a cafe on the street in Sarajevo, there's not going to be a sniper up in the hills going to shoot them. So sometimes we measure success in ways that are unrealistic. It's been a great success so far in that at minimum, people are not dying. And let me give you one example. In 1993, I tried to get into Srebrenica when the massacre, just before the massacre. I met with Mr. Milosevic in his office in Belgrade. I refused to meet with him with TV cameras. I refused to meet with him during the day because I did not want to legitimize him. I did not want to in any way suggest that he was legitimate. But I met with him in his office for almost 3.5 hours. And midway through the conversation in his office, he looked at me when we were arguing, and he said, "Well, what do you think of me?" And I said, "I think you're a goddamn war criminal, and you should be tried as one." And with that, Mr. Karadzic came in, the man whom Milosevic said he had no control over. And he picked up the phone and called at 10:30 at night, Karadzic, who came running up the stairs, out of breath, going, and sitting down with me. And what was clear to me when I came back, I wrote a report in 1993 to the president. And I said, "Mr. President, I have to come and see you because our policy with regard to Bosnia is a mistake. The arms embargo is a mistake. The arms embargo just solidifies the disproportionate advantage that the Serbs have. 2, we should use air power. to stop the VJ from coming across the Drina. And so the report became known as LIFT, meaning lift the arms embargo, and strike. The President of the United States listened to me for almost an hour and a half. And on the spot, he said, I agree with you. Changed his policy. Not but. His Secretary of State did not agree with me. We walked out of his office into the press room. And as we were walking into the press room, he put his arm out to stop me. He said, one question, Joe. What year was the Battle of Pristina? And I said, 1389, Mr. President, but it's not relevant. You don't have to know that. You just have to know what's happening now. Here is a man, the reason I tell you the story, here's a man that's usually able to command all the facts. He's a brilliant guy. I mean, just raw gray matter.
You're talking about Clinton?
I'm talking about Clinton. Just raw gray matter. He is one of the brightest people I've ever met. But what he had to do was what's very difficult for a president. He had to run counter to all the conventional wisdom. I was the only one telling him, get involved. Every editorial in America was saying, don't get involved. Every smart guy, all the big thinkers were saying, don't get involved. The Bush administration, Larry Eagleburger, the former, said, don't get involved. But the president, to his credit, not because I told him, but because once he saw what was happening, followed his instincts. But the reason why it was slow is that he was pushing against an entire foreign policy establishment, here and in Europe, that said no.
Two battles in the same time among
exactly
administration, among some people at the Pentagon, at the State Department, and of course Congress on the other side, and plus Europe.
That's right. And in Paris, and Bonn, and in London, and every capital in Europe.
But still, he is a president. He
is the president, but he finally convinced people. He finally did it. No one else did it. It wasn't done by Helmut Kohl when he was chancellor. It wasn't done by Chirac. It wasn't done by anybody but Bill Clinton. Now, we can sit here and say he was slow, it didn't go as quickly as we wanted, he was tentative sometimes, and that is true. But he, against the public opinion of the United States, said, I am going to use American power. Put it another way. Had America not used power, its air power, sent its military, do you think one European troop would have gone into Bosnia or into Kosovo?
Would you like me to compliment to American?
No, I'm not looking for a compliment for him. My point is this. What we're talking about here, as you know better than I do, what we're talking about here is reversing 8 centuries of history. And it's very hard to overcome the conventional wisdom.
With regard to the president's legacy, how would you characterize the role of Bosnia and Kosovo?
I think it is the defining moment for him. I wrote him a long memorandum just before Milosevic capitulated. And he was down in Florida. And I said, Mr. President, your legacy will be determined more by how this conflict turns out than anything else, any scandal, any great success in the economy. Because look, had Milosevic prevailed, the fate of Europe is sealed for another decade. Sealed in chaos. And he called me at 11:30 at night at home. And he said, Joe, I got your memo. I promise you, I will stay the course. Because I was worried, because so many people were getting shaky about, oh, I don't know, should we, shouldn't we? The press in this country, as you know as a press person, was relentless in saying this is a failure. And the Republican opposition was saying, and Democrats were starting to go, I don't know. But he stayed the course. And so I think it is his legacy. His legacy is, for the first time in the 20th century, the world said, where we can affect it, we will not tolerate the genocidal behavior in or out of one's country.
That comes to the question about Clinton's doctrine. Talking about president, more often we hear about the so-called Clinton doctrine. Does it exist, or is it yet to come?
It is, like all doctrines, from the Truman Doctrine to every other doctrine, it's in the making. Let me tell you what the elements of the doctrine are. The elements of the doctrine are basic. These are my words, but I don't think he would disagree with me, the president. Number one, there has to be a moral justification for the use of force. Secondly, it has to be in the national interest, the security interest of the United States to engage American forces in addition to having an immoral dimension. Thirdly, there has to be the capacity to be able to get the job done. And fourthly, there has to be the will to do it in terms of our allies. And let me make a comparison. Often African Americans, which is the strongest source of my support politically in my state, they'll say, well, Joe, more people died in Rwanda. More people were killed there. And Joe, you're one of us. Why are you pushing so hard to save people in Kosovo and Sarajevo and Srebrenica and Tuzla? Why are you doing that?
Tell us really, why is it about, what is it about your life that causes you to be so passionate about Bosnia?
Well, because of the history of Europe. The history of Europe, as we saw in the 20th century with Hitler, much of it is shameful and innocent women and children. For example, I took Bob Dole to Sarajevo. I came back and I told everybody here, look, the Serbs are sitting up in the hills in the old section of the Muslim section of Sarajevo, and they are sniping at children. They're only shooting children for the express purpose of intimidating their parents to leave. No one believed me. No one believed me. So I took Bob Dole, or Bob Dole took me. We went, and it was the 50th anniversary of NATO, and we detoured to go in. Took him to a hospital, a major hospital in Sarajevo. As we were going through first the Muslim section, there were these sheets and bedspreads hanging from lines across streets. And he, like everyone else, looked and thought, well, is that because they're drying their clothes? I said, no. That's so little Sasha can move from her mother's house to her grandmother's house without being shot. And then we went into the hospital. And there were only about 15 people in the whole hospital. There was a raven-haired beauty of a young girl lying there about 13 years old. And I sat on her bed, and I held her hand. And Bob Dole stood at the foot of the bed. And she was a magnificently beautiful child. And we had a neurosurgeon with us going around who spoke English. And I talked to her. I don't speak Serbo-Croatian. I talked to her and just held her hand. And she looked at me, but beyond me. And I said, why is she not looking at me? He said, well, the bullet went through here, went through and out the front and severed her, actually through this way, and severed the optic nerve. And it was at that point that Dole and others there realized that this is hideous. Children are often the victims of war, the collateral damage. But whenever they become the object of the war, there is an inhumane system in place. And when we can affect that, we must. And if we don't, it is certain that it will spread. And so the Clinton doctrine says, A, is there a moral imperative? B, is there a U.S. interest? C, do we have the ability to affect the outcome? And D, do we have the will with our allies? And I believe that's the doctrine.
Looking back on what has happened since Dayton Agreement was signed, would you agree with critics who say that the only real success was stopping the war?
The answer is yes and no. We have to crawl before we can walk. Your country was devastated. 250,000 people killed, millions of people displaced. Stopping the war was the first essential step to begin reconstruction. the rate of return is slow. The rate of reconstruction is even slower. There are people, I suspect, like your parents, who return for the first time to where they were from and find nothing but rubble, nothing but devastation. But a second thing has happened. For the first time since Dayton Accord was signed, the leaders of Bosnia, Croat, Bosniak, and Serb, are now, the leadership is beginning to realize there is no future in Belgrade. There is no future in Zagreb. There is a future in Bosnia, because the bombing and the implementation of NATO's policy in Serbia made it much less attractive to think that you could have federation splitting. I predict to you there will be now an added emphasis on cooperation, because you will begin to see, the people of Bosnia will begin to see what happens in Bulgaria and Hungary and Croatia and Slovenia and Kosovo as the European countries get together in the EU and commit 20, 30, 40 billion dollars to rebuild the region, to have a new approach. And what's going to happen is the people of your country are going to have to make a basic decision. They're either going to conclude that they live together, or they will get no help. They will get no help. Emphasize, they will get no help. Just like the Serbian people, I predict to you, will overthrow Milosevic by spring, because we've made it clear, no help to Serbia. No help to Serbia as long as Milosevic is there. So I realize it's incredibly difficult. As I walk through the streets of Brčko and any other place in the Republic of Srpska or in the Federation, and see the devastation, it's hard for me to understand how people can have the will and perseverance to continue. But I also remember the devastating films of Berlin and Dresden and all of Europe after World War II. And a mighty, mighty, mighty democracy grew up. The same can happen in Bosnia.
I have to admit, it sounds good, but Bosnians feel that they are no longer a matter of interest. What needs to happen to bring Bosnia back into spotlights?
The political leadership agreeing to implement Dayton. They will be in the shadows if the political leadership does not implement Dayton. If Dodik is not able to increase the rate of return in the Republic of Srpska of Croats and Muslims, in fact, they'll be left behind. That will happen. They will be left. We will not help.
Senator Biden, what, in your view, should the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina be doing to secure their future? Dr. Kissinger said that partition is a logical outcome for Bosnia.
I think Dr. Kissinger has been wrong. He was wrong in 1990. He was wrong in 95, and I respectfully suggest he's wrong in 1999. There is no way that you can partition, in my view, Bosnia without setting a precedent that the definition of nationhood is solely based on nationalities. And if you do that, how do you explain what we do with the Hungarian minority in Romania, with the Turkish minority in Bulgaria? I'm going to say something you're going to be offended by. You must become more like Americans. This last Friday, was with 5 students from the Balkans, 3 of whom were Serbs and 2 Albanians. I was playing on the beach with them. They were talking to one another. We intermarry in this country. It's a different thing. No one has recently shot my mother or father. But the attitude, there is no future for Bosnia that is not one that over time does not contemplate a united Bosnia. There is no future for it.
You know that Belgrade regime was the guarantor of the Serbian part of Dayton Agreement, President Milosevic in particular. Now that he is an indicted war criminal, what do you think will happen to him and consequently to the peace process? Should Dayton be reopened?
Dayton should not be reopened. The guarantors of Dayton will be the European powers. The guarantors of Dayton and the Serb part of the Dayton Accords will be the Serbs in Bosnia because they have no alternative. There is no alternative to move to Belgrade. There is no alternative. The only power that existed in terms of them being able to prevail unfairly is if Belgrade sided with them. Belgrade can't do a thing. And if Belgrade and a future leader attempted to move, the NATO would move on them. So this is, your future's in your hands. Your future's in your, it's incredibly difficult. It's going to be painful, just like it was painful for the French and the Germans ultimately ever to live together, and they're living together. Just as it was painful for it to happen throughout Europe over this century. It's going to be painful, but it is hopeful. Here you have, for the first time, all of the focus of the Western world on the Balkans. They're prepared to say, we will stay involved.
Senator Biden, whenever you're talking about Bosnia, you are talking with great familiarity about Izetbegovic and Silajic. Do you consider them friends? And in short, what is overall American impression of Balkan leaders, especially Milosevic and Tudjman?
The overall impression of Milosevic is he's a criminal, and he should be tried as one, and we should not deal with him. My impression of Tudjman is, were he able to have his own way, he would not be helpful. He is not a helpful player, in my view. My impression of Haris Silajic is colored by the fact I consider him a close personal friend. And so I can't objectively speak to him. My impression of President Izetbegovic, who I've known for a long time, is that he has to be more forceful in keeping the Bosniak end of the commitment. And one of the things that happens, it's a little bit like, how can I say it? If each party thinks the other party is not going to give it all, then they don't give anything. Somebody has to have the courage to move first. And I think with the demise of Milosevic, the end of the Serbian regime, and the occupation of Kosovo, I think a reality is descending upon your country that the answer is not going to be found in domination on the battlefield.
Senator Biden, since you're talking to the Bosnian audience, to the Bosnians, what is your best guess about their future?
My best guess is that by the year 2010, we're going to be holding another Olympics in Sarajevo. That's my best guess.
Senator Biden, I thank you very much.
Thank you.